Think for a moment about the word endurance. What does it truly mean to carry a heavy burden, not just for a few minutes, but for days, weeks, even years on end? Now, picture a figure from the ancient world, a symbol of power and discipline known across millennia, the Roman Legionary. We see him in films and history books, clad in gleaming metal, an unstoppable force that conquered the known world. But we rarely stop to consider the sheer physical reality of that image. Beneath the polished surface of that iconic armor was a man, a human being, whose very survival depended on his ability to bear an incredible weight. Today, we are going to step into his sandals and answer a question that gets to the very heart of his existence. We are going to discover exactly how much a Roman soldier's armor weighed, and in doing so, we will uncover a story not just of metal and leather, but of astonishing human resilience. This isn't just about a number on a scale. The true weight of a legionary's kit was measured in more than pounds or kilograms. It was measured in the dust of endless roads, in the sweat of a summer campaign, and in the silent strength required to stand firm when fear demanded flight. When we talk about the weight of Roman armor, we are unlocking a fundamental truth about what made the Roman armies so formidable. It wasn't just their training or their tactics. It was their incredible mobility, their ability to march farther and faster than their enemies while carrying everything they needed to live and fight. This weight was a calculated tool of war, a burden that, when mastered, became a tremendous advantage. The legionary was a walking fortress, a self-sufficient unit of conquest, and the load he carried was the price of empire. So, join us on a journey to unpack the full kit of a soldier of Rome, from his distinctive helmet to his rugged hobnailed boots. We will examine each piece of his equipment, understand its purpose, and feel the cumulative heft of history's most famous fighting machine. This is more than a history lesson. It's an exploration of human limits and the engineering marvels that helped push them. By the end, you will have a profound appreciation for the legionary not as a distant statue, but as a flesh and blood testament to endurance. Let's begin by stepping on the training field and confronting the first, and perhaps most defining, piece of his equipment. Indeed, that's a crucial distinction to make right at the start. When we casually say Roman armor, our minds often jump to that iconic metal breastplate, the Lorica Segmentata, made of those overlapping iron strips. But for the soldier on the march, that was just one component of a much larger and more complex system. His entire existence was dictated by what was formerly known as his sarcina, his marching pack. This wasn't a simple backpack for a day hike. It was a meticulously organized collection of everything required for him to function independently for days or even weeks at a time, far from any permanent base. So, the weight we're investigating isn't just the burden of protection in battle. It's the weight of a mobile, self-sufficient life. This comprehensive load can be broken down into two main categories: the fighting order and the marching order. The fighting order, what a soldier would carry directly into combat, was heavy enough on its own. It included his helmet, or galea, which was made of bronze or iron, and often featured cheek guards and a neck guard. Then came his body armor, which could be the Lorica Segmentata, an earlier type of mail shirt called Lorica Hamata, or a scale armor known as Lorica Squamata. He carried his gladius, the short stabbing sword, on his right hip, and his pugio or dagger on his left. But perhaps the single heaviest piece of his battle gear was the scutum, the large, curved rectangular shield. Constructed from layers of wood laminated together and covered with leather, with a heavy iron boss in the center, the shield alone could weigh upwards of 20 pounds. Then we have the marching order, the sarsana proper. This is where the weight truly accumulated. Attached to a long pole carried over his shoulder, he would have a satchel containing his rations for several days, typically hardtack biscuits, grain, and maybe some salted meat. He carried a cooking pot, a water skin, a saw or sickle for gathering wood, a wicker basket for moving earth when constructing fortifications, and a pickaxe or stake for the same purpose. He also had a spare pair of the tough leather sandals, the caligae, and personal items. Historical sources like the writings of Josephus suggest that when you combine the fighting order with the full marching pack, the total load could be staggering. We are talking about a burden that likely ranged between 60 and 100 pounds, a weight that modern soldiers, with their advanced composite materials, would still find challenging. This wasn't just a kit, it was a portable house and workshop strapped to a man's back. And so we come to the very shell of the Legionary, the element that transformed a man into a symbol of imperial power, his body armor. It's fascinating to realize that there wasn't a single, uniform type worn by every soldier across the centuries. Roman armor was a story of constant evolution, of adapting technology and resources to meet the demands of an expanding empire. The weight a soldier felt on his shoulders depended greatly on which chapter of that story he lived in. The three primary types he might have worn: the lorica Hamata, the lorica Squamata, and the iconic lorica Segmentata each presented a unique balance of protection, cost, and, crucially, mass. First, consider the lorica Hamata, the chainmail shirt. This was often the armor of the early professional legions and remained in use for centuries, especially among auxiliary troops. Crafting a hamata was an exercise in patience and metalworking skill, involving the linking of tens of thousands of iron rings, each individually punched from a sheet of metal or drawn out as wire and then riveted closed. A full shirt, extending to the mid-thigh with short sleeves, could contain over 30,000 rings. The result was a remarkably flexible defense against slashing cuts, but it came with a significant weight penalty. A complete lorica hamata could weigh around 30 pounds, and this was a weight that hung directly from the soldier's shoulders, distributing its burden in a way that could become deeply fatiguing over a long day's march. It was like wearing a very heavy, inflexible sweater made entirely of iron. Then there is the lorica Squamata, or scale armor. This offered a different approach to protection, consisting of small, overlapping metal scales, much like the skin of a fish or a reptile, sewn onto a fabric or leather backing. The visual effect was stunning, catching the light in a way that chainmail could not, and it provided excellent protection from downward blows. However, the construction method also contributed to its heft. While potentially lighter than chainmail in some configurations, a well-made squamata could still tip the scales at 25 pounds or more. Its weight was also less evenly distributed than mail, often feeling more rigid and restrictive. This type of armor seems to have been particularly favored by officers and standard bearers, for whom appearance and status were as important as pure battlefield utility. But for most people, the image that truly defines the Roman soldier is the lorica segmentata, the banded armor made famous from Trajan's column and countless Hollywood films. This was a masterpiece of Roman engineering, a system of curved iron strips fastened together with internal leather straps and brass hinges that encased the torso in a protective cage. Its genius lay in its design. The curved bands were excellent at deflecting blows, and the weight was cleverly distributed across the shoulders and hips, making its roughly 20 to 25 pounds feel more manageable than the deadweight pull of a mail shirt. It was arguably the most advanced personal armor of its time, but it was not without its drawbacks. The Segmentata was complex to manufacture and maintain. If a hinge broke or a strap snapped on campaign, repairing it required a skilled armorer, whereas a torn ring in a Hamata could be patched by the soldier himself with a simple pair of pliers. The choice of armor, therefore, was never just about weight in isolation. It was a constant calculation of protection, mobility, durability, and the logistical footprint of the entire army. Of these three types, the Lorica Hamata stands out for its incredible longevity and widespread use. This chainmail shirt was the workhorse of the Roman army for hundreds of years, a testament to its effective, if demanding, design. To truly appreciate the burden it placed on a soldier, we need to look closely at how it was made. Each shirt was a masterpiece of painstaking labor, constructed from thousands of individual iron rings. A single Hamata could easily contain over 30,000 of these small, interlocked circles. The rings weren't all the same either. Often, rows of solid, punched rings were alternated with rows of rings that were drawn from iron wire and then riveted closed. This combination created a garment that was both strong and surprisingly flexible, allowing a soldier to move his arms and torso with relative freedom. But that flexibility came at a cost: mass. The very nature of chainmail, with its dense, layered metal weave, meant it was inherently heavy. A full-length shirt with sleeves could indeed weigh anywhere from 22 to 33 pounds, a significant load to bear before you even picked up a shield or a weapon. What's crucial to understand is that this weight wasn't just a number on a scale. It was a constant pulling force on the soldier's body. Unlike the later Segmentata, which was designed to transfer some of its weight onto the hips, the Hamata hung almost entirely from the shoulders. Think of it as wearing an exceptionally heavy, metal winter coat that you couldn't take off. During a battle, the adrenaline and movement might make the weight feel less oppressive, but the real test came on the march. Imagine a legionary, part of a column stretching for miles, trudging along a dusty Roman road under the summer sun. With every step, those 30-plus pounds of iron would shift and pull, the straps digging into his tunic and his skin. The cumulative effect over 15 or 20 miles in a single day was a special kind of exhaustion that targeted the shoulders, neck, and back specifically. This is why Roman training was so brutally focused on conditioning. A man had to be hardened not just to fight, but to carry the very tools of his trade across vast distances. The weight of the Hamata, therefore, was a key factor in shaping the legionary's legendary endurance. It was a burden that forged resilience into his very muscles. Now, let's turn our attention to a type of armor that was visually stunning and offered a unique kind of protection: the Lorica Squamata. If chainmail was the workhorse, scale armor was often the mark of a distinguished soldier, perhaps an officer or a standard bearer. Picture this: instead of interlocking rings, the surface of the armor is made up of hundreds, even thousands of small metal plates, each one overlapping the one below it, much like the scales of a fish or the feathers on a bird. These individual scales, typically iron or bronze, were pierced with several holes at the top, and then sewn securely onto a sturdy fabric or leather undergarment. The overall effect was a shimmering, flexible metallic skin that moved with a distinct rustle, a sound that would have been unmistakable on the ancient battlefield. In terms of sheer mass, the weight of a Lorica Squamata was often comparable to a chainmail shirt, generally falling within that 22 to 31-pound range. But the experience of wearing it was distinctly different. Where chainmail was a uniform, draping weight, scale armor had a more rigid, structured feel. The flexibility was not as seamless as mail. You couldn't bunch it up in your hand. Instead, it moved in sections, with the scales sliding over one another. This construction gave it a particular defensive strength. While a well-aimed thrust might potentially find a gap between scales, the Lorica Squamata was exceptionally effective against slashing attacks. A sword blow would slide across the overlapping plates. Its energy dissipated across multiple scales rather than being concentrated on a single point. The design was brilliant at spreading the force of an impact, helping to prevent serious injury from blunt trauma as well. However, this design also introduced a specific vulnerability. The entire integrity of the armor depended on the strength of the threads or leather laces that held each scale to the backing. If an enemy's weapon, perhaps a spear or an arrow, managed to snag and break a few of these crucial stitching points, a whole section of scales could become loose or fall off entirely, creating a dangerous gap in the soldier's protection. Maintaining Squamata required careful inspection to ensure none of the stitching was fraying. This contrasts with chainmail, where a broken ring could be replaced individually with relative ease. So, the choice to wear scale armor was a trade-off. You gained superior defense against certain types of attacks, but accepted a different kind of maintenance challenge and a slightly different feel on the body, a testament to the fact that for the Romans, armor was never a one-size-fits-all solution but a constantly evolving toolkit for survival. And finally, we arrive at the armor that has come to define the Roman soldier in the popular imagination, the magnificent Lorica Segmentata. This is the plate armor you see on monuments like Trajan's Column, a suit of overlapping horizontal iron strips that encase the torso in a gleaming shell. It's a true icon, but its significance goes far beyond its striking appearance. What made the Segmentata a revolutionary piece of military equipment was a combination of intelligent engineering and practical weight management. While a full suit of the earlier chainmail could weigh 30 pounds or more, the Segmentata was surprisingly efficient, typically coming in at around 20 pounds. This was not a trivial difference for a soldier who had to carry that weight every single day. The real secret to its effectiveness, however, was not just the total weight, but how that weight was carried. Unlike the mail shirt, which hung like a dead weight from the shoulders, the Segmentata was a masterclass in ergonomics. Its curved bands were cleverly designed to wrap around the body, and the entire assembly was structured to transfer a significant portion of its load onto the soldier's hips via a system of internal leather straps. This is a principle that modern backpackers and soldiers understand well. A load carried on the hips is far more manageable and causes less fatigue than one borne solely by the shoulders and back. This intelligent distribution meant that those 20 pounds of iron felt markedly lighter and less restrictive than the heavier mail, granting the legionary greater freedom of movement for marching, throwing his pilum, or engaging in close quarters combat with his gladius. This design also offered superior protective qualities. The overlapping, curved iron strips were excellent at deflecting blows away from the body. A sword strike or a spear thrust was more likely to glance off the angled plates than to penetrate. Furthermore, the rigid nature of the Segmentata helped dissipate the energy of a blunt impact across a wider area of the torso, reducing the risk of broken ribs or internal injury. It was, in many ways, the peak of Roman personal armor technology for the common soldier. Yet, for all its brilliance, the Segmentata was not a perfect solution. Its complexity was its Achilles heel. All those separate plates, hinges, and buckles required skilled craftsmen to manufacture and maintain. If a hinge broke or a crucial leather strap snapped during a campaign on the distant frontiers of Britain or Dacia, fixing it properly was a much more involved task than simply patching a broken ring in a chainmail shirt. This vulnerability to complex repairs is likely a key reason why the simpler, more easily maintained lorica hamata never truly fell out of use and eventually made a full comeback in the later Roman army. The story of Roman armor, therefore, is not a simple march of progress, but a constant and fascinating balance between protection, weight, mobility, and the harsh realities of military logistics. While the torso bore the brunt of the armor's mass, a legionary's head was certainly not left unprotected, and the helmet he wore added its own critical and very noticeable weight to the overall burden. The classic imperial Gallic or Italic helmet, the kind we so strongly associate with the legionary, was a sophisticated piece of equipment. Crafted from a single sheet of iron or bronze, it featured a broad neck guard to protect against downward blows to the back of the head and substantial cheek pieces that could be tied together under the chin, leaving only the eyes, nose, and mouth exposed. This entire assembly, while offering life-saving protection, typically weighed in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 kilograms, or roughly 4.5 to 6.5 pounds. Now, 4.5 pounds might not sound like very much when you compare it to a 30-pound male shirt, but the experience of carrying that weight is entirely different when it's perched on top of your head. Unlike a backpack or even body armor, a helmet's weight directly affects your center of gravity and balance. During the chaos of battle, with sudden movements, dodges, and the impact of blows, that few pounds could feel magnified, taxing the neck muscles constantly as they work to stabilize the head. The strain wasn't just a momentary thing in a fight, either. Think about the long hours spent on sentry duty, standing perfectly still under the sun, or the endless marching where every step sends a subtle jolt through your body. The cumulative effect on the neck and shoulders from a helmet worn for hours on end was a specific and draining form of fatigue that every legionary would have known intimately. This is precisely why the interior of the helmet was so vitally important. That metal shell was never worn directly against the skin. Inside, it was lined with a padded cap, likely made of leather or fabric, and stuffed with wool or some other soft material. This padding served two essential purposes. First, and most obviously, it was about comfort, providing a cushion between the hard metal and the soldier's head, preventing chafing and hot spots. But second, and more critically, it was about survival. This layer was the primary system for shock absorption. When a sword, axe, or club struck the helmet, the padding helped to dissipate the force of the impact across a wider area of the skull, dramatically reducing the chance of a concussion or a fatal skull fracture. It turned a potentially lethal blow into a jarring, ringing headache, a far better outcome. So, the weight of the helmet wasn't just dead metal. It was part of an integrated system of protection, where the interior padding was as crucial to its function as the iron shell itself, a small but mighty layer standing between a soldier and oblivion. Now we arrive at a piece of equipment that was arguably the most defining element of the Legionary's kit, not just for its defensive power, but for its sheer physical presence, the scutum. This was not a small, round buckler for dueling. It was a massive, curved rectangle that could cover a man from his chin to his knees. To call it a shield almost feels like an understatement. It was a portable wall, and its construction was a testament to Roman ingenuity. Layers of thin wood, often birch or plywood, were laminated together with the grain of each layer running perpendicular to the last. This created a structure that was remarkably strong and shock-absorbent, yet surprisingly lightweight for its size. This wooden core was then covered in canvas and leather, which were soaked and stretched taut to form a hardened protective skin. But the true heart of the scutum, both physically and symbolically, was the umbo, the heavy iron boss that sat squarely in the center. The weight of this completed shield is where the physical reality truly hits home. A fully reconstructed scutum can weigh anywhere from 12 to 22 pounds. To put that into a modern perspective, that's the equivalent of carrying a large car tire in one hand, but without the convenient grip. This was a substantial, unwieldy mass that the legionary had to manage. On the march, it was often slung over his back by a central handle, its broad surface acting like a sail that caught the wind, adding to the exertion. But the real test came when it was time for battle. A soldier didn't just hold the scutum passively, he had to actively manipulate it. In a defensive testudo formation, or tortoise, his arm would be locked in position, supporting the shield's weight for potentially hours as missiles rained down. In an offensive advance, he had to hold it out in front of him, the curve allowing it to rest against his shoulder, but still requiring immense stamina in the arm, shoulder, and back muscles to keep it steady. The purpose of this formidable weight was twofold, blending brutal practicality with psychological warfare. Physically, the scutum was an incredibly effective defense. Its large size meant a soldier could crouch behind it and be almost completely protected. The curved shape was a stroke of genius. It could deflect incoming spears and arrows, and it also allowed a formation of men to interlock their shields, creating a seamless, moving barrier. But perhaps its most overlooked function was as an offensive weapon in its own right. That heavy iron boss wasn't just for decoration. A legionary could use the entire weight of the scutum to punch forward in a brutal shove, a technique called the scutum punch. The impact of 20 pounds of wood and iron driven by a strong man could stagger an opponent, break their stance, or even smash their face, creating the perfect opening for the deadly thrust of the gladius that would follow. The scutum, therefore, was not a passive defense. It was an integral part of an aggressive fighting system, a burden that, when mastered, became an instrument of overwhelming force. Up until now, we have focused on the defensive and carrying load, the items designed to protect the soldier and sustain him on campaign. But a legionary's purpose was not merely to endure. It was to close with and destroy the enemy. This brings us to the tools of his trade, his offensive weapons, which added their own critical weight to the equation. On his right hip hung the legendary gladius, the Spanish-style short sword that was the primary instrument of Roman conquest. In terms of sheer mass, the gladius was surprisingly manageable. The blade itself was relatively short, and the hilt was typically made of wood or bone, resulting in a total weight of just over 2 pounds. This lightness was absolutely intentional. It was a weapon designed for rapid, repeated thrusting in the tight confines of a shield wall, where quick, controlled movements were far more valuable than heavy, sweeping slashes. A soldier could wield it for hours without his arm becoming excessively fatigued, a crucial advantage in the grueling press of battle. But the gladius was not the first weapon a legionary would use in a fight. That honor went to the pilum, the heavy javelin, and here is where the offensive load became truly significant. While the sword was light, the pilum was a purposefully heavy piece of equipment. Each one weighed around 4.5 pounds, and a soldier was typically expected to carry 2 of them into combat. This added another 9 pounds of weight that had to be managed, not just carried, but deployed with devastating effect at the critical opening moment of an engagement. The pilum was a masterpiece of military engineering. Its long, thin iron shank was tipped with a small pyramidal point, but the genius was in the joint connecting the iron shank to the wooden shaft. This joint was designed to be weak. When thrown with the full force of a running legionary, the pilum would hit an enemy's shield with tremendous kinetic energy. The iron shank would then bend or break at the joint, making it impossible to pull out and throw back. The bent pilum would drag down the shield, forcing the enemy to discard it and leave themselves exposed for the legionary's final advance with the gladius. This combination of weapons created a specific and exhausting sequence of exertion for the soldier. Before he ever got within sword range, he had to unleash his pila. Imagine the scene. The enemy line is just yards away, adrenaline is surging, and with a coordinated shout, the entire front rank hurls their heavy javelins. This was not a casual toss. It required a running start and a powerful, committed throw to achieve the necessary penetration and distance. To do this effectively while wearing up to 30 pounds of armor and carrying a 20-pound shield demanded explosive strength and perfect technique. The act of throwing 2 pila in quick succession would have been a massive cardiovascular burst, leaving the soldier momentarily breathless before he even began the brutal work of close quarters combat. So, the weight of these offensive weapons was not just a matter of ounces and pounds on a scale. It was a weight that had to be translated into lethal velocity at the precise moment it was needed. A final, explosive output of energy that was the culmination of every burden he had carried for miles to reach that field. Beyond the major pieces of armor and weaponry, a legionary's effectiveness depended on a collection of smaller, meticulously designed items that were just as vital to his daily existence. These were the essential extras, the elements that completed his kit and transformed him from a man carrying gear into a fully integrated instrument of the Roman army. Among the most personally significant was the military belt, known as the balteus. This wasn't just a functional strap, it was a powerful symbol of a soldier's identity. Made of thick leather and often adorned with decorative metal plates, the balteus was worn prominently around the waist. Its primary job was to hold his dagger, the pugio, suspended on his left hip. The pugio itself was a formidable piece of craftsmanship, a short, broad-bladed dagger with a robust handle, weighing in at around 1 to 2 pounds when combined with its sheath. But the weight of the balteus and pugio together was about more than just mass. It was about balance and readiness. While the gladius was his main weapon, the pugio served as a crucial backup for close quarters fighting, a tool for daily tasks like preparing food, and a final, grim implement if all else failed. The distinct clinking sound of the metal plates on his belt as he walked would have been an audible declaration of his profession, a constant, reassuring reminder of his status and his tools. Then we come to what connected the soldier most directly to the earth beneath his feet, his footwear. The iconic caligae were far more than simple sandals. They were rugged, open-toed boots engineered for the relentless demands of military life. Constructed from a single piece of thick cowhide leather that was soaked, shaped to the foot, and then laced up, they were durable and, importantly, breathable. After a long march, a soldier could easily unbuckle them, wash his feet in a stream, and let the leather dry without it becoming stiff and uncomfortable. While the shoes themselves weren't excessively heavy, perhaps adding a pound or two, it was their defining feature that added the most significant weight and function, the hobnails. The sole of a caliga was studded with dozens of these iron nails, arranged in a specific pattern. This hobnailing process added a tangible heft to each step, but it was a weight that paid immense dividends. The primary purpose of these hobnails was traction. On the stone-paved surfaces of Roman roads, in muddy fields, or on loose, rocky ground, the metal studs bit into the surface, providing a stable grip that simple leather soles could never offer. This allowed the legionary to maintain his footing during a charge, stand firm in a shield wall, and march for miles without slipping. Furthermore, the hobnails acted as a wear plate, dramatically extending the life of the leather sole against the abrasive grind of countless miles. The sound of an approaching Roman column would have been unmistakable, a rhythmic, metallic clicking and scraping that announced their presence long before they came into view. This auditory signature was the sound of empire on the move, a testament to the fact that even the nails on a soldier's boots were a carefully considered component of Rome's military dominance. Every piece of his kit, from the heaviest shield to the iron on his soles, was part of a single, integrated system designed for one purpose: enduring victory. So far, we have been focusing on the soldier's fighting load, the armor, shield, and weapons he needed for the actual combat. But for the vast majority of his military career, a legionary was not fighting, he was marching. And for that, he had to carry his entire life on his back. This brings us to the most comprehensive and arguably the most physically demanding part of his burden: the marching pack, known to the Romans as the sarcina. This was not a simple knapsack. It was a meticulously organized, portable base of operations that allowed a legionary to be self-sufficient for days or even weeks at a time, far from any permanent fortress or supply depot. The total weight of this kit was staggering. When you add the sarcina to the 60 or 70 pounds of fighting order he already carried, the soldier's entire load could reach, and likely exceed, 100 pounds. This is a weight that would challenge a modern, professionally trained soldier equipped with lightweight composite materials. To carry this immense burden, the Romans developed an ingenious system. The components of the sarcina were not simply stuffed into a bag. They were carefully arranged on a T-shaped pole called a furca, which the soldier would carry over his shoulder. This method distributed the weight more effectively than a simple sack and kept the items accessible and secure during long marches. Let's unpack the contents of this incredible load, piece by piece. First, there was the cloak or sagum. This was a heavy, woolen blanket-like garment that served as his raincoat, his sleeping cover, and his tent. It was his primary defense against the elements, and its weight was a necessary comfort. Then came his ration bag, containing several days' worth of food. The standard ration was simple but calorie-dense: hardtack biscuits, known as bucellatum, which provided long-lasting energy, and a measure of grain, likely wheat, that he could grind and cook into a porridge or simple bread. This bag alone could weigh 10 pounds or more. But a soldier doesn't just carry food, he has to prepare it. So he also carried a patera, a bronze cooking pot with a handle. This versatile item was his kitchen used for boiling water, making stew, or baking flatbread over a fire. Then came the tools for camp construction, a daily ritual for the Roman army. This included a wicker basket for moving earth, a pickaxe, or dalebra, for breaking ground, and a stake used for building the famous palisade walls around their nightly camp. He also carried a saw or a sickle for gathering firewood. Each of these items, the saw, the dalebra, the basket, added several more pounds of essential, non-negotiable weight. Every single item in the sarcina had a clear, practical purpose that contributed directly to the legionary's survival and the army's operational effectiveness. The dalebra, for instance, was far more than a simple digging tool. It was a multi-purpose implement that could be used as a weapon in a pinch, for chopping wood, for quarrying stone, or for building the ramparts and ditches that made a Roman marching camp a formidable temporary fortress. The act of building these camps every single night, no matter the weather or how far they had marched, was a core discipline of the Roman military machine. It was a task that fell to every soldier, and the tools to accomplish it were therefore his personal responsibility to carry. The true test of endurance, then, was not the occasional battle, but the daily grind of the march. A typical forced march could cover 15 to 20 Roman miles in a day, which is roughly equivalent to 14 to 18 modern miles. Now, imagine setting out on a hike of that distance, over unpaved roads and rugged terrain, while carrying a total load equivalent to a large bag of concrete mix. This was the relentless reality for the Roman soldier. The weight of the sarcina was the price of the empire's incredible mobility. It was this ability to move entire armies swiftly across continents, carrying their own supplies and fortifying their own camps, that gave Rome a decisive logistical advantage over almost every opponent it faced. The legionary was not just a fighter. He was a pack mule, an engineer, and a survivalist, all rolled into one. The immense burden he bore on his shoulders was, quite literally, the foundation of Roman power. So, let's do the math for a typical legionary wearing Lorica Segmentata. Armor, 9 kilograms, helmet, 2.5 kilograms, scutum, 7.5 kilograms, gladius and putio, 2 kilograms, pila, 4 kilograms, and the marching pack, 17 kilograms. That brings us to a staggering total of approximately 42 kilograms, or about 92.5 pounds. And this is a conservative estimate. Some historians suggest the full load could reach 50 kilograms, or 110 pounds, or even more. Now, those numbers on their own are difficult to truly comprehend. We need to translate them into a tangible human experience. Picture a modern soldier on patrol in full combat gear, carrying body armor, a helmet, weapons, ammunition, and a rucksack. That load is typically around 45 to 60 pounds, already considered exceptionally demanding. The Roman legionary was carrying nearly double that upper limit, with equipment made almost entirely of wood, leather, and iron, materials that offered no lightweight modern composites to ease the burden. This immense weight was not carried over a flat, paved road for a short distance. The standard daily march for a legion was 20 Roman miles, which is roughly 18.5 modern miles, or about 30 kilometers. But that was just the baseline. A forced march, urgent and punishing, could push that distance to 24 or even 30 Roman miles in a single day. And the terrain was rarely ideal. This journey took them across rugged, unpaved paths, through muddy river valleys, up steep hillsides, and under a scorching sun or driving rain. There were no supply trucks following behind to offer a respite. Every single item he needed for survival was on his back for the entire journey. The physical toll of this endeavor is almost unimaginable. The constant pressure on the shoulders and hips from the furca pole, the strain in the legs and lungs from the relentless pace, the chafing of the leather straps against sweat-soaked wool. This was the brutal price of being part of history's most effective military machine. Yet, the Romans understood that a man cannot simply be ordered to carry such a weight. He must be physically and mentally forged to do so. This is where the legendary Roman training regimen comes into focus. A new recruit, a Tyrians, was not given his full kit on the first day. His training was a gradual, systematic process of building strength and endurance. He would begin by marching with just his weapons, then progressively add pieces of armor, and finally, the full sarcina. But the training didn't stop at just carrying the weight. Recruits were made to march for hours at the military pace, which was a brisk walk, and then to run for periods at the full pace, all while carrying this equipment. They practiced complex maneuvers, forming and dissolving battle lines, building marching camps, and digging fortifications, all while under load. This was not just physical conditioning, it was acclimatization. The goal was to make the 90-plus pounds feel like a second skin, an extension of his own body, so that when the time came for a real campaign, the soldier could focus on the battle ahead, not on the crushing weight he carried. His body, through relentless repetition, had been fundamentally reshaped to meet the Empire's demands. This relentless pace wasn't just an impressive statistic. It was the very engine of Roman military dominance. To cover such a distance in just 5 hours, a legionary was moving at a pace of roughly 4 Roman miles per hour, a speed that even a lightly equipped person on a good path would find demanding. But he was doing it while carrying a burden that could exceed his own body weight, on roads that were often little more than dirt tracks. The physical exertion required is almost beyond modern comprehension. Every single step was a conscious effort, a battle against gravity and fatigue. His heart and lungs worked at maximum capacity for hours on end, his leg muscles burning with the constant strain, while the straps of his pack dug deeper into his shoulders with each passing mile. This was not a casual hike. It was a sustained, high-intensity cardiovascular and muscular ordeal. The Army's strict discipline was the only thing that made such a feat possible. The legionary did not march as an individual. He moved as one small part of a vast, coordinated machine. The entire column advanced to the beat of drums or the blast of horns, maintaining a steady, unbreakable rhythm. There was no stopping to rest or adjust a pack without orders. This enforced synchronization meant that a soldier's personal suffering was subsumed into the collective effort. To stumble or fall out of pace would be to fail his comrades, a powerful psychological incentive to push through the pain. The centurion, marching alongside his men, would be watching for any sign of weakness, his vine staff a sharp reminder of the standards expected. The march itself was a form of battle, a daily test of will where the enemy was not a foreign warrior, but the very limits of human endurance. What's even more astonishing is what often came after those 5 hours of grueling travel. Upon reaching the designated site for the night, the soldier's work was far from over. Before he could rest, eat, or tend to his blistered feet, he had to participate in the construction of a full fortified camp. Every single man had a role to play in this nightly ritual. Some would be detailed to dig the defensive ditch and build the rampart with their dalibras and wicker baskets, while others gathered timber for the palisade wall. This was not a casual bivouac. It was a standardized, defensible fortress built from scratch in a matter of hours. The physical labor involved swinging a pickaxe, moving tons of earth, after already carrying a massive load for 20 miles, represents a level of sustained output that seems superhuman by today's standards. This incredible capacity for movement gave the Roman army a strategic advantage that few of its enemies could match. While a tribal army might gather and move slowly, encumbered by wagons and non-combatants, a Roman legion could appear with shocking speed, as if materializing from the landscape. They could outmaneuver opponents, secure strategic positions like river crossings or mountain passes before the enemy arrived, and retreat in good order if necessary. This logistical mastery meant that the Romans often chose the time and place of battle, forcing their adversaries to react to their movements. The weight on each soldier's back, therefore, was not a disadvantage. It was the key to operational flexibility. The legionaries suffering on the march directly translated into tactical superiority on the battlefield, making the empire's relentless expansion possible. The true weight of his armor was measured not just in pounds of iron, but in the miles he could conquer while wearing it. This brings us to a critical point. The sheer weight of the equipment was only half the challenge. The other, perhaps more brilliant half, was how the Romans mastered the science of distributing that load across the soldier's body. They understood that 100 pounds carried inefficiently is a debilitating burden, but the same weight, intelligently distributed, becomes a manageable tool. This was not a matter of chance. It was the result of centuries of relentless refinement, where every strap, every buckle, and every packing method was optimized for one purpose: to keep the legionary moving. Consider the genius of the Lorica Segmentata once more. Its system of overlapping plates and internal leather straps wasn't just for protection. It was a primitive but highly effective form of load-bearing ergonomics. By transferring weight from the vulnerable shoulders down to the stronger hips and pelvis, it fundamentally changed how the soldier experienced his armor. Instead of a constant, dragging pull on his neck and back, the weight became a more balanced part of his core structure. This is a principle that every modern backpacker knows well. A hip belt transforms a painful carry into a sustainable one. The Romans, through empirical trial and error, arrived at the same engineering solution over 2,000 years ago. This principle of smart distribution extended to the largest single item, the scutum. On the march, the soldier didn't constantly hold his 20-pound shield in his hand. It was equipped with a central carrying handle, and a separate leather strap, called a balteus, could be attached. He would sling the shield across his back using this strap, turning it into a kind of rigid backpack. While this added to the overall surface area catching the wind, it also spread the shield's considerable weight across his back, freeing his hands to carry the furca pole. This alternating of loads, shield on the back, then furca on the shoulder, would have allowed different muscle groups to rest periodically during the long haul. But the most sophisticated system of all was the packing of the sarcina itself. The T-shaped furca pole was the key. A soldier would meticulously arrange his gear on this crossbar. His wicker basket for moving earth might hang from one end, his cooking pot and ration bag from the other, with his cloak and perhaps his rolled-up tent section securely tied in the middle. When he hoisted the furca onto his shoulder, the weight was balanced on either side of his body. This central point of contact, with the load suspended symmetrically, was far more stable and less fatiguing than a single, heavy bag pulling him to one side. It was the ancient equivalent of a perfectly packed hiking backpack, where balance is everything. The final layer of this burden-sharing strategy moved beyond the individual to the smallest unit in the legion, the 8-man tent group, or contubernium. These men were more than just comrades. They were a single logistical unit. While each soldier carried his personal gear, the heavier communal equipment necessary for the group's survival was distributed among them. One man might carry the heavy leather tent section that would join with 7 others to form their complete tent. Another might be responsible for the hand mill, the mola, a crucial but weighty stone tool used to grind their grain into flour for bread. Yet another could carry a larger shared cooking cauldron or a bundle of extra stakes for the camp's palisade. This system of shared burden was a stroke of practical genius. It prevented any one man from being crushed under the weight of absolutely every item needed for survival. More importantly, it forged an unbreakable bond of interdependence. The failure of one man to carry his share of the group equipment would mean that all 8 would go without a tent or fresh bread. This created a powerful peer pressure dynamic that reinforced discipline and unit cohesion. The success of the Contubernium, and by extension the entire legion, depended on every single man reliably bearing his appointed part of the load, both personal and shared. The weight of empire, therefore, was not carried on one man's shoulders, but was distributed across the intertwined fates of 8. While we can calculate the weight and understand the mechanics of its distribution, to truly grasp the human cost of this burden, we need to listen to the voices of those who have tried to shoulder it in the modern era. Historical reenactors and experimental archaeologists who don full, meticulously reconstructed kits provide us with the closest possible window into the physical reality faced by the legionary. Their experiences are not just academic. They are visceral, painful, and deeply humbling. After marching just a few miles in authentic reproduction gear, even extremely fit individuals report a level of exhaustion that is difficult to articulate. The first and most immediate complaint is often the relentless pressure on the shoulders, where the straps of the pack and the weight of the armor dig in, creating deep, painful bruises. The muscles of the upper back and neck scream under the constant strain of stabilizing the heavy helmet and the shifting load. But the suffering doesn't stop there. The legs, particularly the quadriceps and calves, bear the brunt of propelling this immense weight forward with every single step. It's a grinding, deep muscle fatigue that sets in long before the march is over. Then there are the feet. Despite the ingenious design of the Caligae, the combination of miles walked and the added pounds leads to blisters and hot spots that can turn a march into a torture test of willpower. These modern volunteers speak of a total body depletion that goes beyond simple tiredness. It's a systemic drain that affects concentration, mood, and even cognitive function. This first-hand testimony transforms the historical legionary from a statue-like figure into a living, breathing, suffering human being. And it gives us a profound, gut-level appreciation for the almost superhuman toughness that was required. This leads to an inescapable conclusion. The Roman legionary was not merely a soldier. He was a meticulously crafted military athlete. His body was his primary instrument, and it was honed for a specific, grueling sport, the sport of campaign warfare. Through years of relentless training, he didn't just build general fitness. He developed targeted, exceptional strength in the exact muscle groups needed for his task. His core strength, the muscles of his abdomen, obliques, and lower back, would have been phenomenal. This core was the vital link between the powerful drive of his legs and the stable platform of his upper body, allowing him to maintain posture and balance under the crushing load of his kit. A weak core would have meant a slumped posture, compressed lungs, and rapid, debilitating fatigue. Similarly, the strength in his legs and glutes would have rivaled that of a modern Olympic weightlifter or a professional rugby player. These were the engines that powered every march, every charge, and every hour spent standing firm in the battle line. His shoulder and back muscles were thickened and conditioned to an extraordinary degree, not for throwing punches, but for bearing weight. The act of holding the heavy scutum steady for hours, or supporting the furca on a day-long trek, built a unique kind of muscular endurance that is rarely seen outside of specialized professions today. When we look at a Roman soldier, we must see past the metal and leather to the physiology underneath. A man whose very anatomy had been reshaped by his profession into a perfect instrument for carrying empire. His training was a brutal, lifelong process of adaptation that turned the impossible burden of his equipment into a manageable, if still arduous, daily reality. Of course, the legionary's burden was not a fixed and unchanging load he was doomed to carry until the end of his days. The Roman army was nothing if not pragmatic, and the weight a soldier carried was fluid, adjusted with cold, calculated precision based on the immediate tactical need. The immense sarcina, the marching pack that could add 40 or 50 pounds to his load, was the key to strategic mobility, but it was an absolute liability in the chaos of close combat. Therefore, on the eve of a battle, a crucial transformation would occur. The soldier would leave the bulk of his non-essential gear securely within the fortified walls of the marching camp, switching from what was known as the full marching order to the light marching order or fighting order. This shift was a dramatic unburdening. Suddenly, the weight of the cooking pot, the ration bag for several days, the heavy Dalibra pickaxe, the wicker basket, and the spare cloak would vanish from his shoulders. This could reduce his total burden by a massive 15 to 20 kilograms, 33 to 44 pounds. Imagine the physical and psychological relief of setting down that portion of the load. The soldier who moments before had been a pack mule and an engineer was now pared down to his most essential function, a warrior. This lighter load consisted of his armor, the Segmentata, Hamata, or Squamata, his helmet, his gladius and pugio, his pilum, and, of course, his scutum. These were the tools of violence and nothing more. The difference in agility and stamina would have been profound. Freed from the dead weight of the sarcina, the legionary could move with greater speed and freedom. His ability to raise and maneuver his heavy shield would be enhanced, his reaction times quicker, and his overall endurance in the fighting line significantly extended. He could advance, retreat, and wheel with his unit without being encumbered by a pole full of camping gear. This practice highlights the Romans' sophisticated understanding of combat physiology. They recognized that a soldier fighting for his life needed every possible physical advantage, and that even a few kilograms of unnecessary weight could be the difference between a victorious thrust and a fatal stumble. This system also reveals the incredible logistical discipline of the Roman army. The entire camp, containing the life savings of 5,000 men, had to be defensible by a small guard detail, allowing the main force to march out unencumbered and with full confidence that their possessions would be safe upon their return. It was a perfectly balanced equation. The weight of the pack enabled the army's strategic reach, while the ability to shed it at the critical moment ensured its tactical lethality. The legionary mastered both extremes of endurance, the long, grinding haul and the short, explosive fight, and his kit was designed to excel in both. Yet the burden of empire was not shared equally by every man who served beneath the eagle standards. The weight a soldier carried was as much a reflection of his rank and role within the vast military machine as it was a matter of standard issue equipment. While the standard legionary bore the iconic, meticulously calculated load we've been exploring, other key figures on the battlefield experienced a very different physical reality. A centurion, the backbone of the legion's discipline and leadership, was instantly recognizable by the transverse horsehair crest on his helmet, a mark of his authority that set him apart from the ranks. His armor was often more ornate, perhaps made of finer materials like silvered or gilded bronze, and while this might add some decorative weight, he was typically spared the most grueling burden of all, the full marching pack. A centurion would have had an aide or a servant to carry his sarcina, allowing him to march with only his fighting order. This was a crucial privilege, as it freed him to focus on commanding his century of 80 men, moving up and down the column to maintain discipline and morale without being crushed by the same physical exhaustion as his troops. His load was one of command and responsibility, not of earth-moving tools and rations. Even more distinct was the experience of the auxiliary soldier. These were men recruited from non-citizen provinces, who fought alongside the legions as specialized units, archers from the east, cavalry from Gaul and Spain, or light infantry from the rugged frontiers. Their equipment was often quite different, reflecting their traditional fighting styles. Instead of the heavy segmentata, an auxiliary infantryman would typically wear a lorica hamata, the chainmail shirt, and crucially, he carried a flat, oval shield rather than the massive, curved scutum. This lighter shield alone could reduce his load by several pounds. Furthermore, auxiliaries were often deployed as skirmishers or for patrolling difficult terrain, roles that demanded greater speed and agility over raw, defensive power. As a result, their kit was generally lighter overall. They might not carry the same range of entrenching tools as a legionary, since the heavy labor of building full-scale marching camps often fell to the citizen soldiers. This created a tangible hierarchy of burden on the march, where the legionary, the citizen soldier, and primary instrument of conquest carried the heaviest load, both literally and symbolically. This variation extended to the specialized troops within the legion itself. A standard bearer or signifer, carrying the heavy pole and metal emblem of his century, had his hands full, literally. He could not possibly manage a large shield or a pilum while holding the standard aloft for all to see. His role was one of immense symbolic importance, acting as a rallying point in the chaos of battle, and his kit was adjusted accordingly, likely foregoing some offensive weapons for the sake of his primary duty. Likewise, a cavalryman's experience of weight was entirely different. While his chainmail shirt might be longer to protect his thighs, and his helmet often had more face protection, he did not carry a large shield or multiple pila. His burden was balanced on the back of his horse, transforming the equation from one of personal endurance to one of animal stamina. This intricate tailoring of equipment to role demonstrates the Romans' sophisticated understanding of combined arms warfare. They knew that a one-size-fits-all approach was inefficient. Instead, they distributed the physical demands of war across a spectrum of soldiers, each optimized for a specific function on the complex battlefield of the ancient world. This brings us to a crucial, yet often invisible, factor that directly influenced every pound the legionary carried: the very quality of the iron itself. We can talk about the design of the segmentata and the construction of the hamata, but the raw material, the iron ore smelted in forges across the empire, was the foundational element. The sophistication of Roman metallurgy played a hidden but decisive role in the soldier's daily burden, because not all iron was created equal. The skill of the blacksmith and the quality of the bloomery iron they worked with could mean the difference between a moderately heavy piece of armor and an unbearably cumbersome one. The process began with bloomery iron, a spongy mass of metal and slag produced by heating iron ore with charcoal. This bloom was then repeatedly heated and hammered by the smith to squeeze out the impurities, a labor-intensive process that required immense skill. A highly skilled armorer, perhaps working in a major military production center, could create a much more refined and homogeneous iron. This superior material was stronger and more consistent. What does that mean for weight? It means the smith could hammer the metal into a thinner, yet still incredibly strong, plate for a segmentata, or draw it into finer, tougher wire for the rings of a hamata. A lorica segmentata made from high-quality iron might have plates that are just a millimeter or two thinner than one made from a poorer quality bloom. But when you multiply that slight reduction over the dozens of plates in a full suit, the savings in weight could be significant, perhaps several pounds shaved off the total load. This was a silent advantage, an engineering gain that translated directly into less fatigue on a long march. Conversely, armor produced on a distant frontier, perhaps in a hurry or by a less experienced smith, might be made from iron that was more porous and brittle, filled with slag inclusions. To compensate for this weaker material and ensure it would still stop a spear thrust, the smith would have to make the plates thicker or the mail rings larger and heavier. This resulted in a piece of armor that offered the same level of protection, but at a great cost in added mass. A legionary wearing a Hamata made from such iron would feel every one of those extra pounds dragging on his shoulders. This variation in material quality helps explain why we find such a range in the weight of archaeological finds and modern reconstructions. There was no single, perfectly uniform standard across the entire Roman world. The metallurgical skill available at the time and place of manufacture was literally forged into the very metal the soldier wore, becoming a permanent part of his physical reality for the entirety of his service. This fascinating parallel between the ancient legionary and the modern infantry soldier reveals a profound truth about the unchanging nature of warfare. While our technology has evolved beyond recognition, the fundamental physical burden placed upon the individual soldier has remained remarkably constant over 2 millennia. A modern soldier, kitted out for a patrol, carries a load that is strikingly similar in total weight to that of his Roman counterpart. His advanced body armor plates, made of ceramic composites and Kevlar, his helmet integrated with night vision mounts and communications systems, his primary weapon, and most significantly, the immense weight of ammunition and batteries. All of this can easily push his combat load past 45 kilograms, or 100 pounds. This immediate similarity is startling. It suggests that the upper limit of what a human being can reasonably carry and still remain combat effective has been a fixed equation throughout military history. Yet, the composition of that weight tells a very different story, one of technological trade-offs. The modern soldier's burden is largely one of consumption. The single heaviest component is often ammunition. Hundreds of rounds of rifle cartridges, magazines for squad automatic weapons, grenades, and specialized explosives account for a massive portion of the load. Then there are the batteries, the lifeblood of modern warfare, needed to power radios, GPS units, night vision goggles, and tactical displays. This is a weight that diminishes over time, expended in the heat of a firefight or drained by electronic devices. In contrast, the Roman legionary's burden was almost entirely one of durable goods. His weight was in the permanent, reusable tools of his trade, the iron of his armor, the wood and leather of his shield, the solid metal of his sword and javelins. His load was static. It did not lighten during battle in the same way. If anything, the loss of a pilum throne was a reduction in his offensive capability, not a relief from weight. This distinction highlights a key difference. The modern soldier carries the means to project overwhelming firepower for a limited time, while the Roman soldier carried the enduring infrastructure of his own survival and hand-to-hand combat. The experience of carrying these loads also differs due to one critical innovation: ergonomic design. Modern load-bearing equipment is the product of extensive scientific research into human physiology. A contemporary tactical vest is engineered with wide, padded shoulder straps and a quick-release buckle system. The weight is meticulously distributed across the torso, and, crucially, transferred to a hip belt, much like a high-end hiking backpack. This system aligns the load with the body's center of gravity, making 100 pounds feel manageable, or at least sustainable, for a period of time. The Roman soldier had no such refined technology. His furca pole was a brilliant solution for its time, but it still concentrated the weight on a single point on his shoulder. The lorica segmentata's hip distribution was a primitive form of this principle, but it was the exception, not the rule. For a soldier in a chainmail shirt, the weight hung directly from the shoulders, creating a constant, fatiguing pull that modern materials and designs specifically seek to avoid. So, while the total mass may be equivalent, the modern soldier benefits from 2,000 years of ergonomic advancement that makes his burden, in some ways, less punishing on the body over long distances. Ultimately, this comparison underscores a timeless military reality. Whether marching down a dusty Roman road in Britannia or patrolling a rugged landscape in the 21st century, the soldier remains the ultimate pack animal. Commanders throughout history have always sought to equip their troops with the best possible protection and the greatest possible firepower, and this has invariably resulted in a kit that pushes the very limits of human endurance. The staggering weight is the undeniable price of survivability and effectiveness on the battlefield. This parallel is a powerful reminder that behind the gleaming armor of the ancient world and the high-tech gear of the modern era, the essential challenge is the same. It is the indomitable will of the individual human being, the strength of their body and the fortitude of their spirit, that must overcome the crushing weight of the tools they carry. The engine of conquest, then as now, is not just the technology, but the incredible resilience of the soldier who bears it. Beyond the tangible strain on muscles and bones, the relentless pressure of the Sarcina forged a powerful psychological landscape within every legionary. This was not a burden that could be shouldered through physical strength alone. It demanded a profound and unyielding mental fortitude. Day after day, mile after mile, the crushing weight served as an inescapable physical manifestation of the army's iron discipline. There was no room for personal comfort or individual whim when every ounce of your being was focused on placing one foot in front of the other. The load became a constant, grinding reminder of the soldier's place within a vast, impersonal machine. He was no longer just a man. He was a single component, a gear that had to keep turning for the entire mechanism to function. This enforced subordination of self to the collective will was the bedrock of Roman military power, and it was learned not in a classroom, but through the aching shoulders and blistered feet of the march. This shared ordeal created an unbreakable bond among the men, a phenomenon known to modern militaries as unit cohesion. Imagine the scene, a column of thousands, each man enduring the same unique brand of suffering. The sound of labored breathing, the rhythmic crunch of hobnailed boots on gravel, the occasional clank of metal. This was the soundtrack of their shared experience. There were no special privileges for the common soldier. The centurion might be spared the Sarcina, but he marched alongside his men, sharing the same dust, the same sun, and the same relentless pace. In this crucible of shared hardship, a powerful sense of camaraderie was forged. A soldier struggling under his load would look to his left and right and see his tent mates, his contubernium, enduring the same trial. There was solidarity in the suffering. Helping a comrade adjust his pack or offering a sip of water during a brief halt were not just acts of kindness. They were essential survival strategies that strengthened the social fabric of the unit. The weight, therefore, was a great leveler. It stripped away pretense and fostered a deep, practical loyalty that would be tested in the chaos of battle. This collective resilience translated directly into battlefield effectiveness. A legion that had marched hundreds of miles together, enduring every conceivable hardship, developed a level of trust and mutual understanding that could not be manufactured. They learned to read each other's fatigue, to anticipate movements, and to function as a single organism. When they formed their battle lines, the men standing shield to shield were not strangers. They were the same individuals who had helped dig the previous night's ditch and had shared their meager rations. The discipline required to carry the load without complaint was the same discipline required to hold the line against a charging enemy. The mental toughness built through enduring the march, the ability to ignore pain, to suppress fear, and to focus on the task at hand, was the exact same fortitude needed to stand firm when the spears began to fly. The legendary cohesion of the Roman legions, their ability to execute complex maneuvers under extreme pressure, was not born on the training field alone. It was hardened on the endless roads of the empire, with every step taken under the weight of their world. But how can we be so confident about these precise weights and the physical experience of the Roman soldier? Our understanding isn't based on guesswork. It's built upon a remarkable convergence of evidence, a multi-layered investigation that brings the ancient world to life. The first and most direct source is the earth itself. At archaeological sites across the former Roman Empire, from the muddy battlefields of Germania to the northern forts of Britain, we have uncovered the actual artifacts. Places like Corbridge in England and Kalkris in Germany have yielded stunning finds. Rusted but recognizable pieces of Lorica segmentata, the iron rings of chainmail shirts, the metal bosses from shattered shields, and even the humble hobnails from worn-out caligae. Holding these objects, or even seeing them in a museum, provides an undeniable physical connection. We can measure their dimensions, analyze the metallurgy, and weigh them directly. These silent relics are the foundational truth, the hard evidence that tells us exactly what the equipment was made of and what its base weight would have been when new. Yet, artifacts alone can't show us how these pieces were worn together or how they functioned in motion. For that, we turn to the Romans' own propaganda. Monumental structures like Trajan's Column in Rome offer a breathtakingly detailed visual record. The intricate carvings spiral upward, depicting the campaigns of Emperor Trajan in Dacia. They show legionaries marching in full kit, building camps, and fighting in formation. We can see how the Lorica segmentata was fastened, how the scutum was held, and how the pilum was carried. However, we must view these depictions with a critical eye. The sculptors were artists, not technical draftsmen, and their primary goal was to glorify the emperor and the army. Proportions can be exaggerated for artistic effect, and finer details might be simplified. The column tells us how the Romans wanted to see their soldiers orderly, powerful, and impeccably equipped, which is invaluable, but it may not reflect the gritty, worn-down reality of a soldier on a 3-year campaign. To bridge the gap between the static artifact and the idealized image, we have the written word. Ancient historians like Polybius, writing in the 2nd century before the Common Era, and Josephus, chronicling the 1st century Jewish wars, provide crucial first-hand observations. They describe the army's organization, its training methods, and the equipment the soldiers carried. Josephus famously remarked on the incredible burden borne by the legionary, a comment that aligns perfectly with our archaeological findings. These texts give us context and scale, helping us understand not just what the equipment was, but how it was used in the grand scheme of military operations. They are the narrative that connects the individual pieces, The most dynamic and revealing field of study, however, is experimental archaeology. This is where historians, craftspeople, and dedicated reenactors take the evidence from all these other sources and put it to the test. Using traditional methods, they create meticulously accurate replicas of Roman armor, weapons, and packs. Then they wear them. They march for miles on reconstructed Roman roads, they practice drills, and they even stage mock battles. This process generates invaluable data that no ancient text or museum artifact can provide. How does a lorica hamata actually feel after 8 hours of marching? Where do the straps chafe? How much does mobility decrease under the full weight of a scutum? The personal testimonies from these experiments, the reports of muscle fatigue, the descriptions of how the load affects balance and breathing, provide a visceral, human dimension to the dry numbers. It is through this combination of digging up the past, studying its art, reading its histories, and physically recreating its conditions that we can confidently step into the worn caligae of the legionary and truly comprehend the magnitude of his daily burden. This idea that a Roman soldier, burdened by his kit, was somehow a slow, plodding figure is perhaps one of the most persistent misconceptions about the ancient army. It's an easy image to conjure. A man so weighed down by iron and leather that he could only shuffle forward. A clumsy giant vulnerable to faster, lighter foes. But the historical and practical evidence paints a picture that is the complete opposite. The reality is that Roman military doctrine was obsessed with strategic speed and tactical agility. The entire system, from the design of the equipment to the relentless training, was engineered not to create slow behemoths, but to produce soldiers who could move with shocking coordination and purpose. Consider the core Roman battlefield tactic, the pilum volley followed by an immediate, aggressive charge. This sequence alone demolishes the myth of clumsiness. A soldier cannot effectively throw a heavy javelin with any force or accuracy if he is encumbered to the point of immobility. That action requires a full-body kinetic chain, a running start, a powerful rotation of the torso, and a forceful extension of the arm. After releasing his pilum, the legionary was then expected to close the distance with the enemy in seconds, using the momentum of his charge to smash into their lines with his shield before drawing his gladius for close quarters combat. This is not the behavior of a slow, cumbersome fighter. It is the hallmark of a dynamic, well-conditioned athlete. The armor he wore was not a cage that restricted this movement, but a shell that enabled it by protecting him during the most vulnerable moment of the attack. The genius of the equipment's design was its contribution to this mobility. Take the lorica segmentata, the pinnacle of this philosophy. Its weight was not a single, monolithic block hanging on the shoulders. Instead, it was a system of articulated plates that moved with the body. The curvature of the bands across the chest and back allowed for a full range of motion in the shoulders, essential for both throwing the pilum and thrusting the sword. The way the weight was distributed across the hips freed the legs to move powerfully and the torso to twist and bend. Even the iconic scutum, for all its size, was part of this mobility equation. Its large, curved surface wasn't just for hiding behind. It was a tool for movement. A soldier could tuck his shoulder into the hollow of the shield, using his entire body to drive it forward as a battering ram, creating openings in the enemy line. The weight of the shield was leveraged as a weapon, its mass adding force to his push rather than simply dragging him down. This emphasis on coordinated movement reaches its zenith in the complex battlefield maneuvers the legions were famous for executing under pressure. We read about formations like the testudo or tortoise. where men would interlock their shields to form an impregnable roof and wall against arrows and stones. This was not a static defensive wall. It was a mobile bunker that could advance steadily across open ground towards fortified positions. The ability to create and move in such a formation, with each man maintaining his precise position and shield angle, requires an incredible degree of practice, spatial awareness, and trust. It is a ballet of violence, a demonstration of unit cohesion that would be impossible if the individual soldiers were clumsy or slow. Similarly, maneuvers like wheeling a battle line or having sentries peel off to reinforce a flank demanded not just discipline, but a fundamental agility from every man in the ranks. Their training ensured that the weight they carried became second nature, an extension of their own bodies that they could manipulate with practiced ease. The Roman legionary was not a slow, heavily armored knight of a later era. He was a swift, adaptable infantryman whose protection enhanced, rather than hindered, his ability to fight as part of a sophisticated and deadly machine. This constant evolution of the legionary's load wasn't driven by a simple desire for improvement. It was a direct reflection of the empire's shifting fortunes. The story of Roman armor is, at its heart, a story of pragmatism. The military was a living organism, constantly adapting its skin, the equipment of its soldiers, to survive in a changing world. During the height of the empire's power and stability in the 1st and 2nd centuries, the army could afford to invest in sophisticated, highly engineered equipment like the Lorica Segmentata. This was the armor of a confident, professional force that prized superior protection and tactical effectiveness above all else. A force that had the time and resources to maintain complex gear. But as the centuries wore on, the pressures on Rome intensified, and the army's needs transformed accordingly. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, the empire was facing a perfect storm of crises. It was grappling with relentless external invasions from all directions, devastating internal civil wars that drained the treasury, and crippling economic instability that shattered the complex trade networks needed to supply a vast, standardized army. In this new, more desperate reality, the priorities for military equipment underwent a dramatic shift. The emphasis moved away from optimal protection for the individual soldier and toward what we might call strategic sustainability. The goal was no longer to create the perfect soldier, but to create enough soldiers and to equip them quickly and affordably. This is why we see a clear trend in the archaeological record, a gradual phasing out of the intricate Lorica Segmentata and a return to the older, simpler technologies. The Lorica Hamata, the chainmail shirt, made a major comeback. While still a significant piece of equipment, mail had distinct advantages in this new era. It was far less complex to manufacture than the Segmentata. A workshop with basic blacksmithing skills could produce it, without requiring the specialized knowledge for crafting and fitting hinged iron plates. It was also much easier to repair in the field. A broken hinge on a Segmentata could render the armor useless until an armorer could fix it, while a torn section of mail could be patched by the soldier himself with a few spare rings and a pair of pliers. This durability and ease of maintenance were invaluable for an army that was now constantly on the move, fighting on multiple fronts far from established supply bases. This move toward simplification extended to the helmet as well. The elaborate imperial Gallic type helmets, with their deep neck guards and embossed eyebrows, gave way to simpler, more utilitarian designs. The late Roman infantry helmet, like the Intercessa or Bercasovo types, was often constructed from just 2 or 4 iron pieces riveted together, with a simpler, more open face and a less pronounced neck guard. Some even abandoned the classic cheek pieces for a more open design. This wasn't a step backwards in a technological sense, but a strategic one. These helmets were faster and cheaper to produce in massive quantities, allowing the later empire to helmet the huge numbers of new recruits needed to defend its borders. The protection was still effective, but it was achieved with far less metal and far less labor-intensive craftsmanship. This shift in equipment directly impacted the weight a soldier carried. While a full mail shirt might be comparable in weight to the Segmentata, the overall trend was towards a slightly lighter, less encumbering kit. The simpler helmets were almost certainly lighter. More importantly, the psychological burden changed. The later Roman soldier was part of a different kind of army, one that was larger, more mobile, and often reacting to threats rather than methodically conquering new territory. The equipment he carried reflected the empire's transition from an unstoppable offensive force to a resilient defensive one. The weight of his armor was no longer the weight of conquest, but the weight of survival, a testament to an empire adapting its very tools in a long, desperate struggle to endure. In the final analysis, the question of how much a Roman soldier's armor weighed cannot be answered with a single, simple number. It was a variable equation, a dynamic load that shifted with the tactical situation, the era, and the soldier's specific role. At its peak, this burden could indeed soar past 45 kilograms, a weight that would challenge even the fittest individual today. But to reduce this to mere statistics is to miss the entire point. This was not a chaotic pile of gear. It was a masterpiece of integrated systems thinking, a carefully balanced triad of protection, offense, and survival. Each piece, from the iron strips of the Segmentata to the hobnails on his boots, was part of an interlocking whole designed for a single purpose: to create the most effective and self-sufficient military unit the ancient world had ever seen. This incredible burden, borne on the backs of thousands of legionaries, was the true engine of Roman conquest. It was the physical manifestation of their unparalleled logistical genius. While their enemies might travel light and rely on foraging or slow-moving supply trains, a Roman legion carried its own world with it. This granted them a strategic mobility that was simply unprecedented. They could appear where they were least expected, outmarch their foes, and secure key positions before an opposing army had even mustered. The ability to build a fortified camp every single night, anywhere in the world, turned every campaign into a series of small, defensible operations. The weight of the Sarcina was, in essence, the weight of invincibility. It meant that the Roman army was never truly vulnerable, never caught off guard, and always ready to fight from a position of strength. Ultimately, however, the most enduring testament is not to the metal or the leather, but to the human spirit. The true marvel of Roman military success lies in the sheer physical and mental toughness of the individual soldier. We must look past the gleaming armor we see on monuments and recognize the man beneath, a man whose body was reshaped by years of brutal training, whose mind was hardened by endless miles of shared hardship. The endurance required to shoulder this load day after day, to march 18 miles and then dig a fortress before resting, speaks to a level of resilience that borders on the superhuman. These were not mythical heroes. They were men of flesh and blood who achieved the extraordinary through discipline, camaraderie, and an unwavering will. The weight they carried was the price of empire, and they paid it in full, step by grueling step, forging one of history's most formidable legacies not with ease, but with an endurance that still inspires us centuries later. So, after walking through the entire kit of the Roman legionary, from the gleaming metal of his armor to the iron nails on his boots. The real surprise might not be any single piece of equipment, but the incredible sum of its parts. The sheer totality of that burden, the way each pound was part of a deliberate, life-sustaining system, is what truly leaves a lasting impression. We hope this journey has given you a new perspective on the legendary discipline of Rome's soldiers, not as distant figures in a history book, but as human beings of almost unimaginable endurance. What part of the Legionary's load stands out the most to you? Is it the sophisticated engineering of the Segmentata, the sheer wall-like presence of the scutum, or the back-breaking reality of the full sarcina? We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation there. If you enjoyed unpacking the weight of history with us, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Hit that notification bell to join us on our very next expedition into the fascinating mysteries of the ancient world. Until then, keep exploring.